I sit in the conference room at Meridian International, staring at the mahogany table where my coffee cup still steams, watching my entire career dissolve between one sip and the next. Marcus Wright, our CEO, just delivered the most devastating 23 words of my professional life with the casual indifference of ordering lunch. "You're replaceable, Isabella. We're restructuring and your position is eliminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out." 12 years of dedication, cultural expertise, and relationship building with our most valuable client means absolutely nothing to him. The $3.5 billion deal with Takeshi Industries that I orchestrated sits unsigned on his desk, and he has no clue what he's just destroyed. My name is Isabella Rodriguez, and until 30 minutes ago, I was the head of International Relations and Cultural Liaison at Meridian International, the most prestigious translation and consulting firm on the East Coast. For 12 years, I built my life around this company, sacrificing weekends, holidays, and personal relationships to master not just the Japanese language, but the intricate cultural nuances that govern international business relationships. Fresh out of graduate school with a degree in linguistics and East Asian studies, I started as a junior translator making $32,000 a year. I lived in a studio apartment in Queens, eating ramen noodles and studying cultural etiquette books late into the night. My colleagues thought I was obsessive, but I understood something they missed completely. Language is just the beginning. True communication requires understanding the unspoken rules, the generational hierarchies, the subtle gestures that can make or break a multi-million-dollar negotiation. That dedication caught the attention of Hiroshi Takeshi, the 74-year-old patriarch of Takeshi Industries, Japan's third-largest construction conglomerate. After a disastrous early meeting where a previous translator inadvertently insulted his family honor through improper verb conjugations, Hiroshi declared he would only conduct American business through me. Not because of my language skills alone, but because I took the time to understand his world. I spent 3 summers in Tokyo living with host families and studying traditional business practices. I learned the proper way to present business cards with both hands and a slight bow. I memorized the seating hierarchies for formal dinners and the gift-giving protocols that show respect without causing obligation. Most importantly, I understood that for Hiroshi, business relationships are built on trust that spans generations. Marcus Wright inherited Meridian from his father 5 years ago, and from day one, he viewed my work as an expensive luxury rather than a strategic necessity. While his father understood the value of cultural expertise, Marcus saw only spreadsheets and profit margins. At 38, he possesses all the arrogance of inherited wealth, with none of the wisdom that earned it. Sarah Chen joined our team 2 years ago as a junior executive with an MBA from Wharton and ambitions that far exceeded her experience. Brilliant with numbers but completely tone-deaf to human dynamics, she immediately identified me as an obstacle to her advancement. She began questioning every expense related to my work, from business dinners with clients to cultural consultants who helped navigate complex negotiations. David Park, our finance director, became Sarah's eager ally in her campaign against me. A man who measures success solely in quarterly reports, he never understood why we needed to spend thousands of dollars on traditional ceremonies or custom gifts for clients. To him, all communication should happen through video calls and email, regardless of cultural preferences. This morning started like any other. I arrived at 7:30, reviewed overnight communications from Tokyo, and prepared briefing materials for the final contract negotiation with Takeshi Industries. The $3.5 billion infrastructure deal represents the largest contract in Meridian's history, and after 18 months of careful cultivation, we were finally ready to sign. At 9:15, Marcus called me into his corner office. Sarah and David were already there, sitting across from his glass desk, with matching expressions of grim satisfaction. I should have recognized the setup immediately, but I was focused on the day ahead and the ceremonial details that would honor Hiroshi's expectations. Marcus didn't waste time with pleasantries. Isabella, we've been reviewing your department's cost structure, and frankly, we can't justify the expense anymore. Sarah has developed a comprehensive analysis showing we can handle international communications through translation software and junior staff. Your salary alone could fund 3 new hires. I felt the floor shift beneath me, but I kept my voice steady. Marcus, the Takeshi relationship requires specific cultural knowledge that can't be replicated by software. Hiroshi specifically requested that all communication go through me because of trust issues with previous interpreters. Sarah leaned forward with a condescending smile. Isabella, I appreciate your dedication, but in today's global economy, we need to be more efficient. Technology has advanced considerably, and frankly, our clients need to adapt to modern communication methods. David nodded enthusiastically. The numbers don't lie. We're paying premium prices for services that can be automated or outsourced at a fraction of the cost. It's simply good business. I tried to explain the nuances they were missing. This isn't about efficiency or cost savings. Hiroshi Takeshi refuses to work with anyone else because previous interpreters made cultural mistakes that cost his company credibility. He specifically told me that trust once broken in his culture takes generations to rebuild. If we change our approach now, especially without proper introduction and transition, we risk losing not just this deal, but any future relationship with Takeshi Industries. Marcus stood up and walked to his window overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Isabella, you're a valuable employee, but you're also replaceable. Every employee is. This is a business decision based on financial reality, not personal sentiment. Sarah will handle the transition, and I'm confident our clients will adjust to our new approach. The word replaceable hit me like a physical blow. 12 years of building relationships, learning languages, navigating cultural minefields, and creating millions of dollars in revenue, and I was just another line item to be eliminated. Security arrived within minutes, led by Tom Martinez, a man I'd exchanged friendly greetings with for over a decade. His face showed genuine sympathy as he approached my desk. I'm sorry, Isabella. I have to escort you out and make sure you turn in your access cards and company devices. My colleagues watched in stunned silence as I packed 12 years of my professional life into a cardboard box. Awards from international business organizations, thank you letters from clients in 5 languages, and photos from contract signings around the world all disappeared into a container that barely weighed 10 pounds. As I cleared out my desk drawers, my personal phone buzzed with a text message in Japanese. The sender was Hiroshi Takeshi himself, a rare direct communication that immediately caught my attention. Isabella-san, I look forward to tomorrow's ceremony. Please confirm the traditional gift exchange protocols and seating arrangements. Your guidance has made this partnership possible, and I am honored to conclude our business with proper respect. My blood turned cold. Marcus never told Hiroshi about my dismissal. Tomorrow's contract signing ceremony was planned around specific cultural requirements that only I understood, and they expected to proceed without me. The traditional gift exchange alone required weeks of preparation with specific items chosen to honor family relationships and business hierarchies. The seating arrangements reflected complex generational protocols that, if violated, could be seen as a deliberate insult. I stared at the message, realizing that Marcus and Sarah had no idea what they'd just set in motion. They thought my job was simple translation work that could be handled by anyone with language software. They had no understanding of the cultural foundation I'd spent years building or the catastrophic consequences of violating it. As security escorted me to the elevator, I looked back at the office where I'd spent the best years of my career. My former colleagues avoided eye contact, probably wondering if they would be next. Sarah was already moving into my office, sorting through files and contact lists, with the efficiency of someone who believed she could replace a decade of relationship building with spreadsheets and software. The elevator doors closed on my old life, and I realized that Marcus Wright was about to learn the hard way just how replaceable I really was. The drive home to my apartment in Brooklyn Heights felt like traveling through someone else's life. For 12 years, my identity had been completely wrapped up in my work at Meridian. I had no husband, no children, no hobbies that didn't relate to international business. My social circle consisted entirely of colleagues and clients. I'd sacrificed everything personal for professional excellence, and in 23 words, Marcus had declared it all worthless. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since I left the office. Text after text from confused contacts at Takeshi Industries, all in Japanese, all asking variations of the same question: why had communication suddenly changed? Kenji Nakamura, Hiroshi's executive assistant, and my primary contact for day-to-day coordination, sent increasingly worried messages. Isabella-san. The preliminary discussions today felt very different. The tone and language patterns were not familiar. Is everything well with you? Mr. Takeshi is concerned about the sudden change in communication style. I sat in my small kitchen staring at messages I was no longer authorized to answer. Through Kenji, I learned that Jenny Walsh, a 24-year-old junior translator with basic conversational Japanese, had attempted to handle the morning's coordination calls using translation software. The result had been a cultural disaster. Jenny had used casual speech forms when addressing senior executives, committed the cardinal sin of speaking before being invited to do so, and completely misunderstood the gift protocols for tomorrow's ceremony. To make matters worse, she'd suggested simplifying the traditional elements to save time, not realizing she was essentially telling a 74-year-old patriarch that his customs were inconvenient obstacles. The translation software had converted her casual American business tone into Japanese that sounded disrespectful and dismissive. Where I would have used honorific language and indirect suggestions, Jenny's translated communications came across as blunt demands. In Hiroshi's cultural context, this represented a fundamental breach of relationship protocols. My landline rang, an unusual occurrence in an age of cell phones. The caller ID showed an international number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Isabella-san, this is Kenji Nakamura. I hope you will forgive my direct contact, but I am very worried about today's communications. Kenji's English, while limited, was clear enough to convey his distress. He explained that Hiroshi had spent the afternoon in private meetings with his advisors, discussing whether to proceed with tomorrow's ceremony. The sudden change in communication style, combined with what appeared to be dismissive treatment of traditional protocols, had triggered concerns about American respect for Japanese business culture. I found myself in an impossible position. I was no longer employed by Meridian and had no authority to speak on the company's behalf, but I also couldn't stand by and watch relationships I'd spent years building destroyed by ignorance and arrogance. Meanwhile, at Meridian, Sarah was discovering that international business relationships couldn't be managed through software and enthusiasm alone. Her afternoon had been a series of escalating crises as she attempted to coordinate details for tomorrow's ceremony. The traditional gift exchange required specific items that honored both the business relationship and family connections. I had spent weeks working with cultural consultants to select appropriate presents, a handcrafted fountain pen set for Hiroshi personally representing the permanence of written agreements, and custom silk scarves for his daughters who served on the company board, acknowledging their importance in family business decisions. Sarah had no knowledge of these arrangements, and had instead ordered generic corporate gifts from a catalog crystal paperweights engraved with Meridian's logo. In Japanese business culture, this represented a fundamental misunderstanding of the gift-giving process, which should honor the recipient rather than promote the giver. The seating arrangement for tomorrow's ceremony required careful attention to generational hierarchy and business relationships. Hiroshi would sit at the head of the table with specific positions designated for family members and senior executives based on age position and their role in the business relationship. I had created detailed diagrams showing not just where people would sit, but how they would enter the room, the order of introductions, and even the timing of tea service. Sarah had simplified everything into a standard American business meeting format, roundtable alphabetical seating and coffee service throughout the meeting. This approach would deeply offend Hiroshi's sense of proper protocol and suggest that Meridian no longer understood or respected Japanese business culture. As evening approached, my phone rang again. This time the caller was Dr. Amanda Foster, a cultural anthropologist who had consulted on several Takeshi Industries projects over the years. "Isabella, just got the strangest call from someone at your company asking about rush orders for tomorrow's ceremony. They want to change everything we've planned. What's going on?" I explained my situation to Amanda, who immediately understood the implications. "Isabella, this is going to be a disaster. Hiroshi specifically chose to work with Meridian because of your cultural expertise. If they proceed without proper protocols, he's going to see it as a deliberate insult. In his generation of Japanese business leaders, this kind of oversight can end relationships permanently. The full scope of the crisis was becoming clear. Marcus and Sarah thought they could replace my expertise with enthusiasm and technology, but they had no understanding of the cultural foundation that made the business relationship possible. They were about to walk into a ceremony that would offend their most important client in ways they couldn't even comprehend. My personal phone buzzed with another message from Kenji this time, including a photo. It showed the conference room at Takeshi Industries' New York office, set up according to traditional protocols I had specified months ago. Hiroshi had clearly spent considerable time and expense preparing for tomorrow's ceremony, expecting the same level of cultural awareness from Meridian. The contrast with Sarah's simplified American approach would be stark and embarrassing. Hiroshi would see immediately that something fundamental had changed, and his reaction would determine not just the fate of the $3.5 billion deal, but Meridian's entire relationship with one of Japan's most influential business families. I realized that my dismissal had created a ticking time bomb that would explode tomorrow morning. Marcus thought he was saving money by eliminating my position, but he was actually destroying the very foundation that made the business relationship possible. As I sat in my quiet apartment surrounded by the cultural artifacts I'd collected over years of international travel, I faced a decision that would define not just my future but my integrity. I could contact Marcus and try to prevent the disaster potentially saving the deal but validating his decision to replace me. Or I could remain silent and let him discover the true value of expertise through painful experience. The choice was complicated by my knowledge that Hiroshi, despite his disappointment, would handle the situation with dignity and grace. He wouldn't explode or create a scene. He would simply withdraw from the relationship, leaving Marcus and Sarah to wonder what went wrong. My phone rang one final time that evening. The caller ID showed Marcus's direct line, and I hesitated before answering. When I finally picked up, his voice was tense, with barely controlled panic. "Isabella, I need you to come in early tomorrow to help with the Takeshi ceremony." Sarah ran into some complexity with the cultural arrangements, and we want to make sure everything goes smoothly. The audacity of his request was breathtaking. He had dismissed me as replaceable this morning, and now he wanted my help to clean up the mess his replacement had created. The irony was almost too perfect to be real. I kept my voice carefully neutral. Marcus, I'm no longer employed by Meridian. You made it very clear this morning that my services were no longer needed and that technology could handle everything more efficiently. There was a long pause before he responded, and I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. Look, this is a temporary situation. We can discuss bringing you back as a consultant for this specific project. The important thing is making sure our biggest client is satisfied. But it was too late for easy solutions. The damage was already done, and tomorrow's ceremony would reveal just how irreplaceable I really was. Sarah spent the night before the ceremony in her office, surrounded by printed emails, translation software outputs, and cultural guides she'd downloaded from the internet. The reality of replacing 12 years of expertise with enthusiasm and technology was becoming painfully apparent, but her pride prevented her from admitting the scope of the problem. At 6 a.m, she called Jenny into an emergency briefing session. The young translator looked exhausted and overwhelmed, clearly understanding that she was being set up to fail in a situation far beyond her experience level. Sarah handed her a thick folder of printed instructions and cultural notes she'd compiled from various online sources. Jenny, I need you to handle this morning's ceremony with complete confidence. The Japanese appreciate directness and efficiency, so don't get bogged down in complicated protocols. We're going to show them how American businesses operate in the modern global economy. Jenny's limited experience with Japanese business culture was based entirely on classroom study and casual conversations with exchange students. She had never participated in a formal ceremony or navigated the complex hierarchies that governed interactions with senior executives. The pressure of representing Meridian in such a crucial situation was visibly affecting her confidence. Meanwhile, Marcus was having his own crisis of faith. He'd spent the early morning hours reviewing the contract details and realized just how much revenue was at stake. $3.5 billion represented nearly 60% of Meridian's annual business, and losing the deal would have catastrophic consequences for the company's financial stability and his own reputation. David attempted to provide reassurance through financial analysis. Marcus, even if there are some cultural bumps in the road, the economic fundamentals of this deal are too strong for them to walk away. They've invested 18 months in these negotiations, and the infrastructure projects are essential to their expansion strategy. A few protocol issues won't derail a business relationship this valuable, but David's confidence was based on American business assumptions that didn't apply to Japanese relationship building. He had no understanding of how cultural respect and proper protocol form the foundation of trust in Hiroshi's business philosophy. At Takeshi Industries' Manhattan office, Hiroshi was conducting his own morning preparation ritual. The 74-year-old executive had arrived early to personally oversee the arrangement of gifts, the placement of traditional elements, and the preparation of the signing ceremony. Every detail reflected his respect for the business relationship and his expectation of reciprocal consideration. Kenji had prepared detailed notes about the expected protocol based on 18 months of coordination with me. The ceremony would begin with formal introductions following generational hierarchy, proceed through traditional gift exchanges that honored both business and family relationships, and conclude with the contract signing using specific procedures that reflected the permanent nature of the agreement. The gifts Hiroshi had selected for Meridian's team represented months of careful consideration. For Marcus, he had commissioned a custom calligraphy piece from a master artist featuring characters that represented successful partnership and mutual respect. For the senior staff, he had selected traditional crafts that reflected American cultural symbols interpreted through Japanese artistic traditions. These gifts weren't just ceremonial objects, but physical representations of his commitment to building a relationship that would span generations. In Hiroshi's business philosophy, the ceremony itself was as important as the contract it celebrated because it established the cultural foundation for all future interactions. Sarah's approach to the morning represented everything Hiroshi found concerning about modern American business culture. She had scheduled the ceremony like a standard corporate meeting with minimal time allocated for relationship building and maximum efficiency for document processing. The gifts she'd selected were generic promotional items that suggested Meridian viewed the relationship as a simple commercial transaction. At 8:30, Sarah received a call from Dr. Amanda Foster, who had been contacted by Takeshi Industries about last-minute ceremony changes. Amanda's voice carried urgent concern as she explained the cultural implications of the modifications Sarah was implementing. "Sarah, I just spoke with someone from Hiroshi's team, and they're extremely confused about the changes to today's ceremony. The protocols you're suggesting would be seen as disrespectful in traditional Japanese business culture. Are you certain you want to proceed with these modifications?" Sarah's response revealed the depth of her misunderstanding. "Amanda, we appreciate your input, but we've decided to modernize our approach. Frankly, in today's global economy, our international clients need to adapt to American business standards. We can't afford to spend hours on ceremonial activities when we have real business to conduct." Amanda tried to explain the potential consequences. "Sarah, this isn't about ceremonial activities. This is about respect and relationship building that's fundamental to Japanese business culture. If you proceed without proper protocols, Hiroshi is going to interpret it as a deliberate insult to his cultural values." But Sarah had already committed to her approach and saw any suggestion of complexity as an admission of failure. She ended the call with confident assurance that American efficiency would impress their Japanese partners and demonstrate Meridian's modern business philosophy. The first sign of trouble came at 9:15 when Jenny attempted to confirm final details with Kenji. Using translation software, she sent what she intended as a friendly confirmation message, but which translated into casual language that suggested impatience with traditional protocols. The software converted her American directness into Japanese that sounded dismissive and culturally tone-deaf. Kenji immediately recognized that something fundamental had changed in Meridian's approach. He brought the message to Hiroshi, who read it with growing concern. The language patterns were completely different from Isabella's careful, respectful communication style, and the tone suggested a lack of understanding about proper business protocol. Hiroshi called an emergency meeting with his senior advisors to discuss the situation. In his decades of international business experience, sudden changes in communication style often indicated internal problems or shifts in company priorities. The casual treatment of ceremony protocols suggested that Meridian might not fully appreciate the cultural foundation of their business relationship. His daughter Yuki, who served as Director of International Relations, expressed the family's growing concerns. "Father, perhaps we should postpone today's ceremony until we can clarify what has changed in their organization. The communication from this morning suggests they may not be prepared to honor the commitments we've discussed." But Hiroshi decided to proceed with the ceremony, partly out of respect for the business relationship he'd built with Isabella, and partly to assess whether Meridian's changes represented temporary confusion or permanent shift in their approach to Japanese business culture. At 10 o'clock, Marcus received a call that sent him into complete panic. The caller was James Harrison, chairman of Meridian's board of directors, who had just received a concerned inquiry from one of the company's major investors about rumors regarding the Takeshi Industries deal. "Marcus, I'm getting reports that there might be problems with this morning's ceremony. Given the size of this contract and its importance to our financial position, I need to know immediately if there are any issues we should be concerned about." Marcus assured Harrison that everything was proceeding smoothly but privately. He was beginning to understand that replacing Isabella might have created complications he hadn't anticipated. The pressure of managing the company's largest deal while simultaneously implementing major personnel changes was proving more challenging than he'd expected. As the ceremony approached, the gap between expectations and reality was becoming dangerously apparent. Hiroshi expected to participate in a traditional business ceremony that honored both cultural protocols and relationship foundations. Sarah was preparing to conduct an efficient American meeting that prioritized document signing over relationship building. The collision between these two approaches was inevitable, and the consequences would extend far beyond a single morning's disappointment. The foundation of trust that had taken years to build was about to be tested by ignorance, arrogance, and the dangerous assumption that cultural expertise could be replaced by technology and good intentions. By 11 o'clock, both sides were committed to their respective approaches, setting the stage for a confrontation that would reveal the true cost of dismissing expertise as replaceable. At 11:15 minutes before the scheduled ceremony, I made a decision that would change everything. I couldn't stand by and watch years of careful relationship building destroyed by ignorance and arrogance. Using contacts I developed outside of official business channels, I reached out to Kenji directly and requested an urgent private meeting with Hiroshi. The Meridian team was already en route to Takeshi Industries' office when I arrived at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, where Hiroshi maintained a permanent suite for his American business activities. The elegant surroundings reflected his appreciation for quality and attention to detail values that extended to every aspect of his business relationships. Kenji escorted me to Hiroshi's private dining room, where the elderly executive was reviewing final preparations for the ceremony. When he saw me, his expression immediately shifted from polite formality to genuine concern. "Isabella-san, I was not expecting to see you this morning. I hope everything is well with your health and family." His question revealed the depth of his confusion about the morning's communication changes. In his cultural context, the only acceptable explanation for such a dramatic shift in protocol would be personal emergency or family crisis. The idea that a company would casually replace their cultural liaison without proper introduction or transition was simply incomprehensible. I took a deep breath and explained the truth about my dismissal watching as Hiroshi's expression shifted from confusion to shock to barely controlled anger. "Mr. Takeshi, I was terminated yesterday morning. Meridian's leadership decided that my position was unnecessary and that translation software could handle all future communications with your organization." The silence that followed was profound. Hiroshi set down his teacup with the careful precision that marked all his movements, but I could see the deep offense in his eyes. In his business philosophy, the relationship between companies was built on trust and mutual respect that transcended individual transactions. Dismissing the cultural liaison without proper communication represented a fundamental violation of that trust. "Isabella-san, this information is very disturbing. You have been our primary contact for many years, and through you we have built a relationship of mutual respect with Meridian. To remove you without discussion or proper introduction of your replacement suggests that the company no longer values our cultural partnership." I explained the morning's communication disasters, the protocol violations, and the casual treatment of ceremony preparations that had already begun to damage the relationship. Hiroshi listened with the patience of someone accustomed to hearing difficult truths, but his occasional questions revealed the depth of his disappointment. As we talked, Hiroshi's phone buzzed with updates from his team about Meridian's arrival at their office. The reports were not encouraging. Marcus, Sarah, and Jenny had arrived with casual efficiency, treating the reception area like a standard business meeting rather than a formal ceremony. They carried generic corporate gifts in shopping bags and seemed impatient with the traditional greeting protocols. Hiroshi made a decision that reflected both his business wisdom and his personal dignity, Isabella-san. I believe I should witness this ceremony myself before making any final judgments about Meridian's intentions. Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding that can be resolved through direct conversation. We traveled together to the Takeshi Industries office, arriving just as Marcus was attempting to navigate the formal introduction process without any understanding of proper protocol. The scene was everything I had feared: cultural confusion masquerading as efficiency disrespect disguised as modernization. Marcus, clearly uncomfortable with the traditional elements he'd been told to expect, was trying to rush through the ceremonial introductions. Sarah stood beside him with visible impatience, checking her phone and treating the cultural protocols as obstacles to overcome rather than respect to honor. Jenny was struggling with basic translation needs, relying on her phone app to interpret complex honorific language and missing crucial nuances in every exchange. Her obvious nervousness was making the situation worse as she attempted to compensate for her inexperience with forced enthusiasm that came across as culturally inappropriate. The gifts exchange revealed the full scope of the disaster. Sarah presented Hiroshi with a crystal paperweight engraved with Meridian's logo, explaining with business school confidence that it represented their commitment to transparency and clarity in business relationships. The interpretation was logical from an American perspective, but completely missed the cultural significance of gift-giving in Japanese business relationships. Hiroshi accepted the gift with polite dignity, but I could see his reaction to the cultural insensitivity. The gift was clearly chosen to promote Meridian rather than honor the relationship, and the casual presentation violated protocols that governed formal business exchanges. In contrast, Hiroshi's gifts for the Meridian team represented months of careful selection and cultural consideration. When Marcus saw Hiroshi and me enter the conference room together, his reaction was immediate and explosive. "What the hell is she doing here, Isabella? You have no business being at this meeting. You're no longer employed by this company, and your presence here is completely inappropriate." His outburst violated every principle of dignity and respect that governed formal business interactions in Japanese culture. To witness such a public display of disrespect towards someone they considered a valued cultural bridge was deeply offensive to Hiroshi and his entire team. I maintained my composure despite Marcus's aggression. Marcus, Mr. Takeshi requested this meeting to understand the changes in Meridian's approach to your business relationship. I'm here at his invitation, not as a representative of your company. Sarah immediately recognized the threat I represented to her narrative about successful transition. She stepped forward with aggressive confidence, determined to control the situation. "Hiroshi-san, I'm sorry for this confusion. Isabella is a former employee who's having difficulty accepting her termination. We've successfully modernized our international communications, and I'm fully prepared to manage all aspects of our business relationship." But Hiroshi had heard enough to understand the true situation. He looked at Marcus with an expression that conveyed decades of business wisdom and cultural authority. "Mr. Wright, I believe we need to discuss these changes privately. The relationship between our companies has been built on mutual respect and cultural understanding that appears to have been compromised." Marcus realized that his dismissive treatment of me was being witnessed by his most important client, but his ego prevented him from backing down. Instead, he doubled down on his position, making the situation exponentially worse. "Hiroshi, I understand you may have personal feelings about staff changes, but this is a business decision based on operational efficiency. Isabella's services were no longer cost-effective, and Sarah represents the modern approach to international business that will benefit both our companies." The word cost-effective, when applied to a relationship Hiroshi had spent years building, represented everything he found problematic about contemporary American business culture. The reduction of cultural understanding to a simple cost-benefit analysis suggested that Meridian no longer appreciated the foundation upon which their partnership was built. Hiroshi's response was delivered with the quiet authority that had built one of Japan's most successful international businesses. Mr. Wright, I believe there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of our business relationship. The cultural bridge that Isabella provided was not a cost center, but the foundation that made trust possible between our organizations. Sarah, sensing that her career depended on controlling this conversation, made a desperate attempt to regain authority. With respect, sir, in today's global economy, we need to focus on efficiency and results rather than outdated protocols. Technology has made many traditional approaches obsolete, and frankly, our clients need to adapt to modern business practices. The silence that followed Sarah's statement was deafening. Every person in the room except for Marcus and Sarah understood that she had just told one of Japan's most respected business leaders that his cultural values were outdated obstacles to efficient business. Hiroshi stood slowly, his dignity intact, despite the insults he had witnessed. Mr. Wright, I believe our meeting is concluded. I will need time to consider whether Takeshi Industries can continue a business relationship with an organization that shows such disregard for mutual respect and cultural understanding. Marcus finally realized the magnitude of the disaster unfolding before him. Wait, Hiroshi. Let's discuss this rationally. I'm sure we can work through any misunderstandings. This deal represents a significant investment for both our companies, and I'm confident we can find common ground. But Hiroshi had already made his decision. The ceremony that was supposed to celebrate the largest deal in Meridian's history had become a demonstration of cultural incompetence and personal disrespect. As he prepared to leave, he delivered the verdict that would change everything. Mr. Wright, after careful consideration, I am canceling today's contract signing ceremony. Takeshi Industries cannot proceed with a partnership that lacks the cultural foundation necessary for long-term success. The $3.5 billion deal that had taken 18 months to negotiate was destroyed in less than 30 minutes, and Marcus finally understood what it meant to be truly replaceable. The silence in Takeshi Industries' conference room lasted exactly 17 seconds, though it felt like an eternity. Marcus stared at Hiroshi with the expression of a man watching his career dissolve in real time, while Sarah's face shifted through a rapid sequence of emotions from confidence to confusion to dawning terror. Hiroshi-san, surely we can discuss this further. Marcus stammered, his voice cracking under pressure. This deal represents significant value for both our organizations. One morning's miscommunication shouldn't derail 18 months of productive negotiations. But Hiroshi had already gathered his materials and was preparing to leave with the dignity that characterized all his business interactions. Mr. Wright, this morning's events have revealed fundamental differences in our approach to business relationships. Takeshi Industries cannot proceed with a partnership that lacks mutual respect and cultural understanding. As Hiroshi exited the conference room, followed by his team of advisors and assistants, Marcus turned on me with desperate fury. This is your fault, Isabella. You sabotaged this deal because you're bitter about being fired. I'll have you sued for tortious interference with business relationships. His accusation was both pathetic and revealing. Even in the face of complete disaster, Marcus couldn't accept responsibility for his own decisions. He needed someone else to blame for the consequences of dismissing expertise as replaceable and treating cultural understanding as an unnecessary expense. Sarah, realizing that her careful planning had collapsed into catastrophic failure, attempted to salvage her position by throwing David under the bus. Marcus, this termination was primarily David's recommendation based on financial analysis. I expressed concerns about the timing, but he insisted we needed immediate cost savings to meet quarterly targets. David's response was swift and merciless. That's completely false, Sarah. You've been planning Isabella's dismissal for months, presenting manipulated data about her value to the company. I have emails documenting your systematic campaign against her position. Within an hour of the ceremony's collapse, news of the canceled deal had reached Meridian's board of directors. The company's stock price, which had risen in anticipation of the Takeshi announcement, began a precipitous decline as investors processed the implications of losing their largest contract. James Harrison, the board chairman, called an emergency meeting for 2 o'clock that afternoon. His voice, when he reached Marcus by phone, carried the cold fury of someone watching decades of institutional reputation destroyed by personal incompetence. Marcus, I need immediate answers about this morning's disaster. How did an 18-month negotiation collapse in a single meeting? And why am I learning about personnel changes that affected our most valuable client relationship through media reports rather than board communications? Marcus's attempts to explain the situation only made it worse. The cost-saving measures he'd presented as prudent business management looked like reckless penny-pinching when measured against a $3.5 billion loss. His dismissal of cultural expertise as replaceable seemed like dangerous arrogance when the consequences included complete relationship breakdown. Meanwhile, the business media had picked up the story with predatory enthusiasm. The narrative of a major American corporation losing a massive international deal due to cultural incompetence was too compelling to ignore, especially when it involved personnel decisions that seemed both callous and strategically foolish. By 3 o'clock, 3 major trade publications had published articles with headlines that made Marcus cringe. Cultural disconnect costs Meridian 3.5B. Deal. Executive dismissal leads to international business disaster, and when cost-cutting becomes self-destruction. The most damaging article appeared in International Business Weekly, written by a journalist who had covered cross-cultural business relationships for 15 years. The piece presented my dismissal as a case study in how American companies undervalue cultural expertise, with particular emphasis on the long-term consequences of prioritizing short-term cost savings over relationship building. Isabella Rodriguez spent 12 years building the cultural foundation that made Meridian's relationship with Takeshi Industries possible. Her expertise in Japanese business culture and her personal relationship with Hiroshi Takeshi were irreplaceable assets that enabled trust between organizations from very different cultural backgrounds. The decision to terminate her position without proper transition or client consultation represents a fundamental misunderstanding of how international business relationships function. The article went on to quote Dr. Amanda Foster and other cultural experts about the specific protocols that had been violated during the morning's ceremony. Each detail emphasized how the disaster could have been prevented with proper cultural understanding and respect for established relationship protocols. But the real devastation came from client reactions beyond Takeshi Industries. By 4 o'clock, 2 other major international clients had called emergency meetings to discuss their own relationships with Meridian. The casual treatment of cultural expertise raised concerns about the company's commitment to relationship-based international business. Heinrich Weber, managing director of a German engineering consortium that represented $40 million in annual business, expressed his concerns directly. James, we are troubled by reports about your treatment of international relationship management. If Meridian no longer values cultural expertise, we need to reconsider our partnership agreements. Dr. Maria Santos, who represented a consortium of Latin American construction companies worth $60 million annually, was even more direct. The dismissal of your cultural liaison without client consultation suggests a fundamental change in Meridian's approach to international business. We cannot risk our relationships being managed by personnel who lack proper cultural understanding. Marcus spent the afternoon in a series of increasingly desperate phone calls trying to reassure clients while simultaneously defending his decisions to an incredulous board of directors. Each conversation revealed new aspects of the disaster he had created through his casual dismissal of expertise. The board meeting at 5 o'clock was a bloodbath. 8 directors who had previously supported Marcus's leadership listened with growing anger as he attempted to justify the personnel decisions that had cost the company hundreds of millions of dollars in current and future business. Elizabeth Morrison, the longest-serving board member, delivered the verdict that everyone anticipated. Marcus, your decision to dismiss Isabella Rodriguez without board consultation or client notification represents a catastrophic failure of executive judgment. The financial consequences extend far beyond the immediate loss of the Takeshi deal. Board member after board member expressed similar sentiments, focusing on Marcus's failure to understand the strategic value of cultural expertise and his casual treatment of relationships that had taken years to develop. The unanimous consensus was that his leadership had become a liability to the company's survival. By 6 o'clock, Marcus had been stripped of his CEO position and would face additional board review regarding potential legal consequences for breach of fiduciary duty. Sarah's termination was announced simultaneously, along with a comprehensive review of all personnel decisions made during Marcus's tenure. David, attempting to save his own position, provided the board with detailed documentation of Sarah's manipulation and Marcus's casual dismissal of warnings about the cultural consequences of my termination. His survival strategy involved complete cooperation with the investigation into the decision-making process that had led to the disaster. The interim CEO, Dr. Patricia Reynolds, was appointed from the board's ranks with a mandate to stabilize client relationships and assess the full scope of the damage. Her first call was to me, offering an immediate return to the company at any salary I specified, along with a formal apology for the treatment I had received. But as I sat in my apartment that evening watching the news coverage of Meridian's collapse, I realized that some damage couldn't be repaired with apologies and salary offers. The trust that had been broken wasn't just between Hiroshi and Meridian, but between me and an organization that had treated 12 years of dedication as a disposable cost center. The word replaceable had revealed the true character of Marcus's leadership, and no amount of desperation could undo the clarity of that revelation. The next morning brought a corporate reckoning that extended far beyond Meridian's Manhattan offices. When financial markets opened, the company's stock price dropped an additional 12% as investors processed the full implications of losing not just the Takeshi deal, but potentially their entire international client base. Dr. Patricia Reynolds, the newly appointed interim CEO, spent her first day conducting damage control that revealed the true scope of the disaster. Her emergency meeting with the senior staff at 8 o'clock laid out the brutal financial reality Meridian faced potential bankruptcy if they couldn't quickly restore client confidence and prevent additional contract cancellations. The company that Marcus had inherited 5 years earlier was now worth less than half its previous value, with mounting legal expenses and reputation damage that would take years to repair. The cost-saving measure of eliminating my position had instead eliminated the foundation of the company's international business model. Patricia's first strategic decision was to hire a crisis management firm specializing in corporate reputation recovery. The consulting team, led by former State Department officials with expertise in international business relationships, delivered an assessment that confirmed everyone's worst fears. Your company's treatment of cultural expertise has become a cautionary tale in international business education. Universities are already using the Meridian case study to teach students about the strategic value of cultural competency. Rebuilding credibility will require years of consistent performance and significant investment in relationship management. Meanwhile, the personal consequences for Marcus and Sarah were becoming equally devastating. Marcus discovered that his reputation in the business community had been permanently damaged by the very public failure of his leadership. Executive recruiters who had previously courted him now avoided his calls, and board positions that had once seemed inevitable were no longer possibilities. Sarah faced an even worse situation. Her aggressive manipulation of data and systematic campaign against me had been thoroughly documented through David's cooperation with the board investigation. Word of her unethical behavior had spread through professional networks, effectively ending her career in international business consulting. The industry that had once been their pathway to success had become their professional graveyard. Both Marcus and Sarah discovered that reputation once lost was nearly impossible to rebuild in the close-knit world of international business relationships. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. At 10 o'clock that morning, I received a call from Hiroshi himself, speaking directly rather than through Kenji. Isabella-san, I have been thinking carefully about yesterday's events, and I would like to discuss a proposal that might interest you. We met at the same hotel where our conversation had initiated the previous day's confrontation. Hiroshi's proposal was both generous and strategically brilliant. He offered me a position as North American Director of Cultural Relations for Takeshi Industries, with a mandate to help other Japanese companies navigate American business culture while avoiding the mistakes that had destroyed their relationship with Meridian. The position came with a salary that was more than double my previous compensation, along with the resources to build a proper cultural consulting team. More importantly, it represented an opportunity to work for an organization that truly valued cultural expertise and understood its strategic importance. Isabella-san, your integrity in yesterday's situation demonstrated the character that makes lasting business relationships possible. We would be honored to have you help us build bridges between our cultures in a way that honors both traditions. As I considered Hiroshi's offer, my phone buzzed with another call from Patricia Reynolds. The interim CEO's voice carried a desperation that would have been unthinkable just 2 days earlier. Isabella, I'm prepared to offer you a position as Vice President of International Relations with complete autonomy over cultural consulting and a budget that reflects the true value of your expertise. But her offer, however generous, couldn't undo the damage that had already been done. Meridian's casual treatment of my 12-year commitment had revealed their fundamental misunderstanding of how trust and expertise function in international business relationships. I politely declined Patricia's offer and accepted Hiroshi's proposal, recognizing that working with an organization that valued cultural competency was worth more than any salary increase from a company that had proven it didn't understand the foundation of its own success. The news of my new position with Takeshi Industries appeared in the afternoon business media, along with analysis about the broader implications for American companies operating in international markets. The narrative was devastating for Meridian. The cultural expert they had dismissed as replaceable was now working for their former client, helping to build relationships with competitors. By evening, 3 additional international clients had formally terminated their contracts, with Meridian citing concerns about the company's approach to cultural competency and relationship management. The cascade effect that Patricia had feared was becoming reality, as each cancellation reinforced the perception that Meridian no longer understood international business fundamentals. The final blow came at 6 o'clock, when Heinrich Weber announced that his German consortium was awarding their new $40 million infrastructure contract to a Meridian competitor, specifically citing their stronger commitment to cultural expertise and relationship building. Marcus watched the coverage of his company's destruction from his empty corner office, having been given a week to clean out his belongings before his official departure. The view of Manhattan that had once symbolized his success now reminded him of everything he had lost through arrogance and poor judgment. Sarah's situation was even more stark. Her aggressive attempts to find new employment had been met with polite rejections that made clear her reputation preceded her. The business community that had once seemed limitless now felt impossibly small, with former colleagues avoiding association with someone known for manipulation and unethical behavior. David, having survived the purge through his cooperation with the board investigation, found himself tasked with documenting the financial impact of the personnel decisions that had triggered the crisis. His analysis revealed that the cost of replacing my expertise exceeded my annual salary by a factor of 20 to 1, even before considering the lost revenue from canceled contracts. As the day ended, the transformation was complete. The company that had dismissed cultural expertise as replaceable had discovered that expertise, relationships, and reputation were the only truly irreplaceable assets in international business. The word that had started the crisis, replaceable, had proven to be tragically ironic when applied to those who had used it most confidently. 6 months later, I stood in my new corner office on the 42nd floor of the Takeshi Industries North American headquarters, looking out at the same Manhattan skyline that had once symbolized my career at Meridian. The view was remarkably similar, but everything else about my professional life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined. As North American Director of Cultural Relations, I now led a team of 12 cultural consultants and international business specialists. Our mission was to help Japanese companies navigate American business culture while assisting American firms in understanding the relationship-based approach that governed Asian business traditions. The work was intellectually challenging and personally fulfilling in ways my previous position had never been. The transformation wasn't just professional but deeply personal. For 12 years at Meridian, I had sacrificed my personal life for career advancement, believing that total dedication to the company was the path to security and success. Marcus's casual dismissal had shattered that illusion, forcing me to recognize that loyalty must be mutual and expertise must be valued to create sustainable success. In my new role, I worked with organizations that understood cultural competency as a strategic asset rather than an operational expense. The respect I received from colleagues and clients reminded me daily that the problem hadn't been my value as a professional, but Meridian's inability to recognize and properly utilize expertise. The morning brought news that completed the circle of justice that had begun with my dismissal. Business Week published a feature article about Meridian's continued struggles 6 months after the Takeshi Industries disaster. The company had lost 68% of its international business and was now focused primarily on domestic consulting, a shadow of its former prominence. Patricia Reynolds, despite her best efforts, had been unable to rebuild the cultural competency that made international relationships possible. The clients who had left Meridian weren't just looking for translation services, but for the deep cultural understanding that took years to develop and couldn't be quickly replaced. Marcus had finally found employment as a senior manager at a mid-sized domestic firm, earning less than half his previous salary and working in an industry that offered limited opportunities for advancement. The executive who had once dismissed others as replaceable was learning what it meant to be replaced by more qualified leaders. His new colleagues, aware of his history, treated him with professional courtesy but little respect. The confidence and authority that had once defined his leadership style had been permanently damaged by the very public failure of his judgment at Meridian. Sarah faced an even more challenging situation. After months of unsuccessful job searching, she had accepted a position as a junior analyst at a small domestic consulting firm that specialized in government contracts. Her international business aspirations had been permanently derailed by her reputation for manipulation and cultural insensitivity. The business community that had once seemed full of opportunities now felt closed to her, with former colleagues avoiding association and potential employers declining interviews when they learned of her role in Meridian's collapse. Success built on undermining others had ultimately destroyed her own career prospects. David had managed to survive at Meridian, but his role had been significantly reduced as the company focused on damage control and domestic operations. The financial analysis that had once seemed so important was now largely irrelevant as Meridian struggled with basic operational survival. But the most significant transformation wasn't in their careers, but an industry understanding of cultural expertise. The Meridian case study had become required reading in business schools across the country, teaching future executives about the strategic value of cultural competency and the catastrophic consequences of treating relationship building as replaceable. Dr. Amanda Foster, the cultural anthropologist who had tried to warn Meridian about the ceremony protocols, now used my story as the opening example in her consulting presentations. Isabella's experience perfectly illustrates why cultural expertise isn't just about language translation, but about building the trust that makes international business relationships sustainable over generations. Universities had begun requiring cultural competency courses for international business majors, and consulting firms were investing heavily in relationship management training. The casual dismissal of cultural expertise that had characterized Marcus's leadership was becoming recognized as a strategic failure that successful companies couldn't afford to repeat. My work with Takeshi Industries had expanded beyond simple cultural consulting to strategic relationship building between Japanese and American companies. We had facilitated 12 major international partnerships with a combined value exceeding $8 billion, demonstrating that proper cultural understanding could create exponential value for organizations wise enough to invest in it. The respect I received from clients and colleagues stood in stark contrast to the casual dismissal I had experienced at Meridian. Executive teams would fly across the country to attend my presentations, and other consulting firms attempted to recruit me with offers that reflected the true market value of cultural expertise. But the most meaningful transformation was personal rather than professional. The painful experience of being called replaceable had taught me to value myself and recognize toxic environments before they could damage my well-being or career prospects. I had learned that expertise paired with integrity would always find appreciation among people wise enough to recognize its value. The lesson extended beyond career considerations to fundamental questions about self-worth and professional relationships. I now understood that being valued by the right people was infinitely more important than being accepted by organizations that didn't understand what made success sustainable. On a personal level, I had begun building the relationships outside of work that I had sacrificed during my years at Meridian. Weekend cultural activities, friendships with colleagues who shared my interests and hobbies that enriched my life beyond professional achievement had created the balanced foundation that made career success meaningful rather than consuming. The apartment in Brooklyn Heights that had once felt like a lonely refuge now served as a comfortable home where I could process the challenges and celebrate the successes of work that truly mattered. The cultural artifacts I had collected over years of international travel now decorated a space where I entertained friends and colleagues, rather than simply storing reminders of professional achievement. This afternoon brought the final piece of vindication that completed my journey from dismissal to triumph. The International Business Association announced that I would receive their annual award for excellence in cross-cultural business relations recognition that would establish me as one of the leading experts in my field. The award ceremony would be held next month in Tokyo, with Hiroshi serving as the presenter, a symbolic completion of the relationship that had been damaged by Meridian's cultural incompetence, but strengthened through mutual respect and professional integrity. As I prepared my acceptance speech, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from that devastating moment in Marcus's office to this pinnacle of professional recognition. Being called replaceable had been the catalyst for discovering that I was genuinely irreplaceable when my expertise was properly valued and my contributions were respected. The speech would focus on the lesson that had emerged from my experience. Success in international business requires understanding that relationships, expertise, and integrity are the only truly irreplaceable assets in a global economy. Companies that treat these qualities as expendable luxuries will inevitably discover their error through painful experience. But the deeper lesson was personal rather than professional. I had learned that people who don't recognize your value don't deserve your loyalty, and organizations that treat expertise as replaceable will eventually pay the price for their ignorance. The word that had once devastated me had become the foundation for a career that exceeded every ambition I had previously imagined. The transformation from Meridian's dismissed employee to Takeshi Industries' respected executive had taught me that setbacks, however painful, often create opportunities for growth that wouldn't have been possible within the constraints of our previous circumstances. As evening approached, I looked once more at the Manhattan skyline and realized that the view hadn't changed, but my perspective had been fundamentally transformed. The city that had once represented the limits of my ambition now symbolized the unlimited potential that awaited those with the courage to value themselves appropriately and the wisdom to work with people who shared that understanding. Marcus had been wrong about many things, but his assessment of my replaceability had been the most costly error of his career. In dismissing me as expendable, he had lost not just an employee, but the foundation that made his company's international success possible. The journey from replacement to irreplaceability had been painful, but ultimately liberating, teaching me that the right opportunities will always find people who combine expertise with integrity, while the wrong opportunities will destroy those who mistake arrogance for leadership. Have you ever been told you were replaceable only to discover that your true value was far greater than those who dismissed you ever understood? The experience of having your worth questioned can be devastating in the moment, but it often becomes the catalyst for finding opportunities where your contributions are genuinely appreciated and properly rewarded. Thank you for joining me on this journey from dismissal to triumph. I hope my story reminds you that expertise, integrity, and cultural understanding are never truly replaceable, even when short-sighted leaders fail to recognize their value. Remember to like this video if it resonated with your own experiences. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength through adversity. Share it with anyone who needs reminder of their own irreplaceable worth, and comment below about times when being underestimated became the motivation for achieving something greater than you had previously imagined. Sometimes the most painful words we hear become the foundation for the most meaningful transformations we experience. May you always find the courage to value yourself appropriately and the wisdom to work with people who recognize what makes you truly irreplaceable.